Martha Ann Brennan pressed her dead husband's frozen hand against her swollen belly one last time, then let go. The snow swallowed him whole. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned toward the broken wagons where 7 terrified souls waited for someone to tell them what to do next. Her baby kicked hard, as if reminding her there was no time for grief. Only survival. If you want to see how this pregnant widow turned wreckage into refuge, subscribe now and follow her story to the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The shovel broke on the 3rd strike. Martha stared at the splintered handle in her hands, then at the shallow grave she'd managed to carve into the frozen earth. 6 inches deep, maybe 8. Not enough to bury a dog, let alone a man who'd promised her a homestead in Oregon and a porch swing facing west. "Ma'am." Jake Whitmore's voice cracked behind her. "Ma'am, we gotta stop. Ground's too hard." She didn't turn around. "Then we dig harder." "With what?" That was the last shovel. Martha finally looked at the 14-year-old boy standing 3 feet away, his nose red and running his coat too thin for this kind of cold. He was trying so hard to be brave. She could see it in the way he clenched his jaw, the way he kept his shoulders square, even though they were shaking. She dropped the broken handle into the snow. "Rocks," she said. "We cover him with rocks. Heavy ones. Wolves can't move what they can't dig under." Jake's eyes went wide. "Wolves? You think we're the only hungry things out here?" Martha pressed her hand against her belly, 8 months along, maybe closer to 9, and felt the baby shift. "Go, find rocks, big as you can carry." The boy ran. Martha knelt beside her husband's body. Samuel Brennan had been a good man. Not a perfect one, he'd had a temper, and he'd never learned when to quit talking, but good. He'd believed in things. In the future. In Oregon. In her. 3 weeks of fever had taken him down to nothing but bones and blue lips. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The wind answered. It always answered out here, filling every silence with its own voice. She heard footsteps crunching through the snow and looked up to see Sarah Jane Tucker approaching, arms wrapped tight around herself. 19 years old, orphaned twice over now. The families she'd worked for as a domestic servant had all died in the same fever that took Samuel. "Mrs. Brennan." Sarah Jane's voice was barely above a whisper. "The others are asking what we do now." "What others?" "Mrs. McAllister, the 2 children from the Patterson wagon. And there's a man he came stumbling into camp about an hour ago. Says his group got separated in the storm." Martha pushed herself up one hand, braced against her lower back. The baby felt like a stone lodged between her hips. Every movement was a negotiation now. What man? Where's he from? "Won't say much, just that he's been walking for 2 days. Sarah Jane hesitated. "He looks rough, ma'am, real rough, but he's got supplies, a whole pack full." Martha looked down at Samuel one more time. She wanted to stay, wanted to sit beside him until the cold took her too, but the baby kicked again, hard, insistent, and she understood that her grief would have to wait. "Show me." Done. The makeshift camp was chaos wrapped in snow. 4 wagons sat in various states of destruction. One had a broken axle and listed sideways like a drunk trying to stand. Another had lost its canvas cover entirely. The wind had ripped it away 2 nights ago. A third had burned when someone knocked over a lantern during the last storm, and now it was nothing but charred bones and melted iron. The 4th wagon was the only one still mostly intact, and that's where Martha found them all huddled together. Agnes McAllister, 45, twice widowed, and meaner than a wet cat, sat on an overturned crate near a dying fire. Beside her 2 children pressed close, Emma Patterson, maybe 7, and her brother Daniel, who couldn't have been more than 5. Their parents had vanished 3 days ago, walked into the snow looking for help that never came. And standing apart from all of them near the edge of the wagon's shadow was the stranger. He was tall. That was the first thing Martha noticed. Tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved by hard years and bad decisions. His beard was thick with ice crystals, his coat patched in a dozen places, and his eyes. His eyes watched her like he was calculating something. "You the one in charge?" he asked. His voice was rough, scraped raw by cold. "I'm the one still standing." Martha stopped 5 feet away from him, close enough to talk, far enough to run if she needed to. "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Wade." "That's supposed to mean something to me." "Means I'm not dead yet, same as you." He tilted his head toward the others. "Your people look like they're about to give up." "My people are surviving." "Surviving ain't the same as living, ma'am." Thomas shifted his pack higher on his shoulder. "I've got salt pork, dried beans, and a medical kit. Found them in an abandoned camp about 10 miles east. Whoever left them isn't coming back for them." Agnes snorted from her crate. "And you're just going to share out of the goodness of your heart? What do you want?" Thomas looked at the old woman, then back at Martha. "A place by a fire. Shelter from the wind. Same things everyone wants when they're freezing to death." Martha didn't answer right away. She studied him, the way he stood, the way he kept his hands visible, the way he didn't try to charm or plead. There was something broken in him, she could see that much. But broken things could still be useful. "You try anything," she said slowly, "and I'll cut your throat while you sleep." Thomas almost smiled. Fair enough. Jake came running back into camp, arms full of rocks, panting so hard he could barely speak. "Found 'em," he gasped. "Big ones, near the creek bed." Martha nodded. "Good. Sarah Jane, help him finish covering Mr. Brennan. Make it tight. I don't want animals getting at him." Sarah Jane's face went pale, but she nodded and followed Jake toward the burial site. Agnes heaved herself up from her crate. "What about the rest of us? We just going to sit here and wait for the next storm to kill us?" "No." Martha walked toward the destroyed wagons, her eyes scanning the wreckage. "We're going to build something." "Build what? With what?" Agnes gestured at the broken wood, the scattered supplies, the canvas scraps flapping in the wind. "This ain't building material, this is trash. Trash is just something nobody's figured out how to use yet." Martha picked up a plank that had fallen from the burned wagon, still solid. Charred on one side, but the wood underneath was dry and strong. "We've got 4 wagon frames. Even broken, that's lumber. We've got canvas, rope, iron fittings. We've got tools in the supply crates, at least we did before the storm." "You're talking about building a shelter." Thomas had moved closer, watching her with those calculating eyes. "In the middle of a Wyoming blizzard, with a group of half-frozen strangers and no proper materials. I'm talking about not dying." Martha dropped the plank and turned to face all of them, Agnes with her skepticism, Thomas with his questions. The children huddled and silent. "We can sit here feeling sorry for ourselves, or we can work. Those are the only 2 choices left." Daniel Patterson, the 5-year-old, tugged at his sister's sleeve. "I'm hungry," he whispered, but in the silence everyone heard. Martha felt something crack inside her chest. These children had watched their parents walk away and never come back. They'd been alone for 3 days before the rest of the group found them surviving on raw flour and melted snow. She walked over to them and knelt down, ignoring the pain in her back and hips. "Daniel, Emma." She waited until they both met her eyes. "I'm going to take care of you now. Both of you. You understand?" Emma's lower lip trembled. "Our ma said she'd come back." "I know she did." Martha reached out and smoothed the girl's tangled hair. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Daniel looked at her belly. "You got a baby in there." "I do. Is it gonna die too?" The question hit Martha like a fist. She had to take a breath before she could answer. "No," she said. "This baby is going to live. And so are you. And so am I. Because we're going to fight. You hear me? We're going to fight every single day until spring comes and we can walk out of here." She stood up and looked at the others. "Anyone who doesn't want to work can leave. I won't stop you. But anyone who stays follows my orders. No arguments, no complaints. We do what needs doing, and we do it together." Her voice hardened. "That includes you, Mr. Wade. You want a place by the fire, you earn it." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Agnes threw up her hands. "Fine. What do you want me to do?" "Inventory. Go through every crate, every trunk, every bag. I want to know exactly what we have left. Food tools, cloth, medicine, everything. Write it down if you can. Remember it if you can't." "And the shelter." Martha turned and pointed at the hollow between two small ridges where the snow had drifted, but the wind seemed to eddy and slow. "There. We're going to dig down and build up. The wagons become walls. The canvas becomes a roof. We insulate with snow." Jake and Sarah Jane returned from the burial site, their faces grim but determined. Jake's hands were raw and bleeding from moving rocks. "It's done," Sarah Jane said quietly. "We covered him as best we could." Martha nodded once sharp and final. She didn't let herself think about Samuel lying under those rocks, cold and alone. She couldn't. Not yet. "Good. Now we work." The first day was the hardest. Martha directed them like a general commanding troops, and somehow they listened. Jake and Thomas dismantled the burned wagon frame, salvaging every plank that hadn't been destroyed. Sarah Jane sorted through the scattered supplies, finding hidden treasures, a needle and thread buried in a trunk, 3 candles wedged under a broken wheel, a bag of dried apples that had rolled into a snowdrift and been preserved by the cold. Agnes complained constantly, but she worked. She cataloged everything with a sharp memory that surprised Martha, rattling off lists of supplies without missing a single item. The children couldn't do much, but Martha gave them small tasks anyway. Emma gathered rope scraps and tied them into bundles. Daniel carried handfuls of nails to Jake, counting each one carefully. And Martha dug. She dug until her arms screamed. She dug until she couldn't feel her fingers. She dug a trench into the frozen earth, then lined it with wagon planks to keep the walls from collapsing. When her back spasmed so badly she had to stop, she sat on a crate and gave directions instead. "Deeper," she called to Jake, who had taken over the shoveling. "Another 6 inches at least." "The ground's like iron, Mrs. Brennan." "Then treat it like iron. Beat it until it breaks." Thomas appeared beside her, breath clouding in the air. He'd been hauling lumber from the destroyed wagons, and his arms were full of salvaged planks. "You know what you're doing?" he asked quietly so the others couldn't hear. "I know what my husband told me." Martha watched Jake attack the frozen ground. He studied the natives, how they survived winters that would kill any white man. Dugouts and hide tents insulated with mud and bark. He said the Sioux could build a shelter in a few hours that would last all winter. "Your husband sounds like he was a smart man." "He was." Martha's voice caught just for a moment. "He was supposed to be here. He was supposed to be the one building this. I was supposed to—" She stopped herself, pressed her hand against her belly where the baby was moving. "Supposed to what?" Thomas asked. "Nothing." She pushed herself up from the crate. "We need more canvas. See if you can find any in the supply wagon that isn't torn to pieces." Thomas didn't move right away. He looked at her, really looked the way Samuel used to when he was trying to understand what she wasn't saying. "For what it's worth," he said finally, "I've seen a lot of people give up in situations like this. Just lay down and wait for death. You're not doing that. Giving up isn't an option when you're carrying someone else inside you. Some women would say that's exactly when giving up makes sense. Save themselves the extra suffering." Martha met his eyes. "Then those women aren't me." She walked away before he could respond. By nightfall, they had the beginnings of something. The trench was 3 feet deep and lined with wagon planks on all sides. 2 wagon frames had been positioned at either end, tilted inward to create walls that broke the wind. Canvas stretched across the top, weighted down with rocks and packed snow. It wasn't much. It leaked in 3 places, the fire pit smoked badly, and there wasn't room for everyone to lie down at the same time. But it was shelter. Real shelter. And when Martha ducked inside and felt the warmth from the small fire hit her face, she almost cried. Almost. The others filed in behind her. Agnes groaned as she lowered herself to the ground. The children curled up immediately against Sarah Jane, who wrapped her arms around them without being asked. Jake sat near the entrance, still holding the hatchet he'd been using all day, like he wasn't sure when he'd need it next. Thomas entered last. He'd been outside securing the canvas edges, packing snow into every gap he could find. His face was raw with cold, his fingers blue at the tips. "Should hold through the night," he said. "Tomorrow we'll need to reinforce the west wall. Wind's coming from that direction." Martha nodded. She was sitting against the far wall, legs stretched out, one hand pressed to her belly. The baby had been moving all day, restless and urgent, and now it was finally settling. "How much food do we have?" she asked Agnes. The old woman grimaced. 3 pounds of salt pork from Mr. Wade's pack, about 5 pounds of dried beans. Those apples Sarah Jane found maybe a dozen. Half a bag of cornmeal, but it's got weevils. We'll eat around them. And water. Snow. We'll melt it as we need it. Martha did the math in her head. 7 people. Maybe 2 weeks of food if they rationed carefully. Longer if they could hunt or trap something. "There's game out there," Thomas said as if reading her thoughts. "I saw rabbit tracks near the creek bed. Deer too, but they'll be harder to take down." "You know how to trap." "Learned a few things in the war." Martha filed that away. The war had ended 14 years ago. Thomas Wade had to be at least 35, probably older. That meant he'd been young when he fought. Young enough to carry whatever he'd seen for a long time. "Tomorrow," she said, "you and Jake set snares. Sarah Jane, you're on firewood duty. Agnes." I know. Keep counting things." Agnes pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Bossy even when she's half frozen. Your husband must have been a saint." Martha almost laughed. "He was stubborn as a mule and twice as loud. We argued every day for 6 years." "And you loved him?" The question hung in the smoky air. "I loved him," Martha said quietly. "That's why I'm still here." The night was long and cold and full of sounds. Wind howled against the canvas. Snow hissed as it hit the shelter walls. Somewhere in the distance, wolves sang their hunting songs. Martha couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Samuel's face, blue-lipped, and still fever sweat frozen on his forehead. She saw the way his hand had gone slack in hers at the end, the way his last breath had rattled out of him like something being released from a cage. She'd promised him. Right before he died, when he could barely speak, she'd promised him she'd make it to Oregon. She'd promised him their child would be born in a real house with a real roof, not a canvas-covered wagon or a hole in the ground. Now here she was, lying in a hole in the ground, and Oregon felt like a fairy tale. The baby kicked, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. "I know," Martha whispered, pressing her hand against the movement. "I know you're still there. I know we're still fighting." She felt someone watching her and turned her head to see Thomas lying on the other side of the shelter, eyes open and reflecting the dying firelight. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" "Haven't slept well in years." He shifted slightly, wincing. "Bad dreams?" "From the war." Silence. Then, "From everything." Martha wanted to ask more who he really was, what he was running from, why a man with medical supplies and survival skills was wandering alone in a Wyoming blizzard, but the questions felt too heavy for a first night. Instead, she said, "We're going to make it." Thomas didn't answer. "I mean it. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever storms come next, we're going to survive this. All of us. You sound certain. I have to be. She looked up at the canvas ceiling at the way it bowed under the weight of the snow. Certainty is all I have left. The fire crackled, the wind moaned, the wolves sang, and somewhere in the darkness, Martha Ann Brennan began to plan.
Downtown.
She woke to screaming. It was still dark, that flat gray dark that came before dawn, and for a moment, Martha didn't know where she was, or why her back hurt so badly, or why there was smoke in her lungs. Then Emma's voice cut through the confusion. Fire! Fire! The wall's on fire! Martha rolled over and pushed herself up. Pain shot through her hips, her spine, her ribs, but she ignored it. The west wall of the shelter was smoldering where a spark from the fire pit had landed on a dry piece of canvas, and flames were beginning to lick up the fabric. Thomas was already moving. He grabbed a blanket and threw himself at the wall, smothering the flames with his body. Jake stumbled over with a pot of snow and dumped it on top of him. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the fire hissed, sputtered, and died. Thomas rolled off the wall coughing. His coat was singed, his hands red and blistering. "Everyone all right?" Martha called out. She was on her feet now, heart pounding. "Anyone hurt?" Heads shook. Voices murmured. The children were crying, clinging to Sarah Jane. Agnes was cursing in words Martha had never heard a woman use before. "We need to move the fire pit," Thomas said between coughs. "Farther from the walls, and we need a better ventilation system. We need a lot of things." Martha looked at the damage, the burned patch of canvas, the scorched planks underneath. Another few minutes and the whole shelter would have gone up. "But we'll fix it. We'll fix everything." She walked to the shelter entrance and pushed aside the canvas flap. Outside, the world was white and silent, and utterly indifferent to their suffering. The storm had passed in the night. The sky was clear, pale pink at the edges where the sun was beginning to rise. The temperature had dropped even further. Martha could feel it biting at her exposed skin, but at least the wind had stopped. She could see the ridges now, the creek bed frozen solid, the scattered wreckage of their former camp half buried in snow. And beyond all of it, stretching to the horizon in every direction, nothing. No smoke from other fires. No tracks from other travelers. No sign that anyone else in the world knew they were here. They were alone. Completely, utterly alone. Martha pressed her hand against her belly and felt her daughter move. "Not for long," she whispered. "We won't be alone for long. We're going to build something here. Something real. And when spring comes, we're going to walk out of this place alive." She didn't know if she believed it, but she was going to act like she did until believing became the truth. The fire pit took 3 hours to rebuild. Martha directed every movement from her place against the wall, her body too heavy with exhaustion to stand for long. Thomas and Jake dug a new trench in the center of the shelter, lining it with flat stones they'd pried from the frozen creek bed. Agnes stitched the burned canvas with trembling fingers, cursing under her breath with every stitch. "Closer together," Martha called out. "The stitches need to be tighter, or the wind will tear right through." Agnes glared at her. "You want to come do this yourself?" "I would if I could feel my fingers." "Then hush, and let me work." Sarah Jane had taken the children outside to gather kindling. Martha could hear their voices through the canvas walls, small and thin against the cold. Emma was singing something, a hymn maybe, and Daniel kept interrupting to ask questions that had no answers. Thomas dropped another stone into the fire pit and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "This should hold better. Heat'll radiate out instead of up. And the smoke. Working on that." He pointed toward the far corner where Jake was hammering a piece of wagon wheel rim into a crude funnel shape. "We'll channel it through that and out a hole in the roof. Won't be perfect, but it'll keep us from choking." Martha nodded. Her back was screaming a constant pressure that wrapped around her hips and squeezed. The baby had been restless all morning, shifting and kicking, like it was trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. "How long?" she asked. Thomas looked at her. "How long what?" "Until the next storm." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the shelter entrance and pushed aside the flap, staring at the sky for a long moment. When he came back, his face was grim. 2 days. Maybe 3 if we're lucky. We haven't been lucky yet. Then we better work faster. The morning passed in a blur of motion. Martha forced herself up twice to inspect the walls, running her hands along the seams to check for gaps. Every time she found one, she called out instructions. Pack it with snow, stuff it with cloth, nail another board over it. By midday, the shelter was warmer. Not warm, nothing could be warm in this kind of cold, but bearable. The new fire pit crackled with flames that didn't threaten to burn them alive, and the smoke rose steadily through Jake's improvised chimney. Sarah Jane ducked inside with an armful of branches. Her cheeks were bright red, her nose running. Found these near the creek bed. They're dead but dry. Good. Stack them near the entrance. We'll need to ration them. Mrs. Brennan. Sarah Jane hesitated. The children are asking about food. Martha's stomach clenched. They'd eaten nothing since yesterday evening, and even then it had been a thin soup of boiled beans that barely filled anyone's belly. Agnes, how much salt pork do we have left? The old woman looked up from her stitching. About 2 pounds, maybe a little more. Cut a 1/4 pound. Divide it 7 ways. That's barely a mouthful each. It's enough to keep us moving. Martha pressed her hand against her belly. We can't afford to eat more until we have a way to replace what we use. Thomas had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up. I'll check the snares Jake and I set this morning. Might have caught something. Take the hatchet, and don't go far. Yes, ma'am. He left without another word. Martha watched him go, something uneasy stirring in her chest. Thomas Wade was useful, capable, strong. But there was something in the way he moved, the way he answered questions, without really answering them, that made her wary. She didn't have time to be wary. She didn't have time for anything except survival. Sarah Jane, help Agnes with the food. Jake, I need you to reinforce the west wall. The boards are starting to bow. Already? Jake's voice cracked with exhaustion. The snow's heavier than I thought. If we don't brace it, the whole thing could collapse. The boy's face went pale, but he nodded and grabbed the hammer. Martha lowered herself back against the wall. The baby kicked hard right under her ribs, and she sucked in a breath. You all right? Agnes asked sharply. Fine. Just... the baby's restless. When's it due? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Agnes snorted. In my experience, babies don't wait for convenient timing. Especially not out here. This one will have to. You planning to tell it that? Martha didn't answer. She couldn't think about labor, not now. Couldn't think about what would happen if the baby came early, if something went wrong, if she bled too much, or the child came out wrong. She couldn't think about any of it. So she didn't. Emma and Daniel crawled into the shelter, their small faces pinched with cold. Emma went straight to Sarah Jane and curled up against her side. Daniel stood in the middle of the floor, looking around like he wasn't sure where he belonged. Martha held out her hand. Come here. The boy hesitated, then walked over and sat down beside her. He was shivering so hard his teeth chattered. Cold? She asked. He nodded. Put your hands here. She guided his small fingers to her belly, pressing them flat against the curve. Feel that. Daniel's eyes went wide. Something's moving in there. That's the baby. She's warm. She's safe. And so are you. How do you know it's a girl? Martha smiled, the first real smile she'd managed in days. I don't, but I hope she is. I always wanted a daughter. I wanted a brother. Daniel's voice was small. But Mama said the new baby died before it could be born. She cried for a long time. Martha felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry, Daniel. That must have been hard for your mama. Is your baby going to die? The question hit her like a blow. She looked into the boy's eyes, so young, so scared, so full of questions no 5-year-old should have to ask, and she shook her head. No, this baby is going to live. I promise you. She didn't know if she could keep that promise, but she made it anyway. The afternoon brought a small victory. Thomas returned with 2 rabbits dangling from his belt. They were thin, barely more than skin and bone, but they were meat, real meat. Found them in the snares near the ridge, he said, dropping them on the floor. Creek beds frozen solid, but there's still game moving through the brush. Jake let out a whoop. Emma clapped her hands. Even Agnes managed something close to a smile. I'll clean them, Sarah Jane said, reaching for the rabbits. My father taught me how. Your father? Thomas raised an eyebrow. The man who employed me. He treated me like his own. Her voice was steady, but Martha caught the flicker of grief in her eyes. He died in the fever. Same as everyone else. Thomas nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just let me work. She took the rabbits to the corner and began the bloody work of preparing them. Martha watched her impressed despite herself. Sarah Jane Tucker was stronger than she looked. Stronger than she probably knew. We need to preserve what we can't eat tonight, Martha said. Salt the meat and hang it to dry. It'll last longer that way. How do you know all this? Jake asked. He'd stopped working on the wall to watch the preparations. My husband. He read everything he could about survival before we left Illinois. Books about the natives, about trappers and mountain men. He said knowledge was the only thing that couldn't be taken from you. Smart man, Thomas said quietly. Yes, he was. The silence that followed was heavy. Martha let it sit for a moment, then pushed herself to her feet. Enough rest. We've got work to do before dark. They worked. By the time the sun began to set, the shelter had transformed again. The walls were reinforced with extra planks salvaged from the supply wagon. The fire pit radiated heat in all directions. A crude drying rack hung near the chimney strips of rabbit meat curing in the smoke. Martha stood in the center of the space, turning slowly, inspecting every corner. Her eyes caught a gap near the floor, a thin line of cold air seeping through. Jake, stuff that crack with cloth, and check the others while you're at it. The boy obeyed without complaint. He was learning, Martha realized. Learning to work without being asked twice. Learning to anticipate problems before they became emergencies. In another time, another place, he might have made a fine foreman. Agnes stirred the pot of rabbit stew that bubbled over the fire. The smell filled the shelter rich and gamey, and Martha's stomach growled loud enough for everyone to hear. Hungry? Agnes asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Starving. Join the club. They ate in silence, passing the pot around so everyone could dip their share. It wasn't much, a few mouthfuls each, but it was hot and filling, and for the first time in days, Martha felt something other than cold in her belly. Daniel fell asleep, mid-bite, his head dropping onto Emma's shoulder. Emma kept eating, methodical and careful, making sure her brother didn't fall over. Martha watched them. These children had lost everything. Parents, home, future. And yet, here they were, still fighting, still surviving. If they could do it, so could she. Mrs. Brennan. Sarah Jane's voice was soft. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. What happens when spring comes? Martha set down her cup. What do you mean? I mean, where do we go? The wagon train is gone. Most of us don't have family waiting anywhere. What do we do? It was a question Martha had been avoiding. She'd been so focused on surviving the next hour, the next day, that she hadn't let herself think about what came after. We go to Oregon, she said finally. Same as we planned. On foot. If we have to. Sarah Jane shook her head slowly. That's 300 miles, maybe more, with children and... She stopped herself, but her eyes flicked to Martha's belly. And a newborn, I know. Martha met her gaze. But we made it this far. We'll make it the rest of the way. How can you be so sure? Because the alternative is dying, and I didn't survive this winter to die on a trail in the spring. Thomas, who had been silent through the whole exchange, finally spoke. There might be another option. Everyone turned to look at him. Fort Bridger is about 40 miles southwest. If the trails are passable, we could make it in a few days. They'd have supplies, medicine, maybe even a wagon we could use. 40 miles in winter, Agnes scoffed. We'd freeze before we got halfway. Not if we waited for a break in the weather. Not if we planned it right. Martha considered this. Fort Bridger. She'd heard of it back when Samuel was planning their route. It was a trading post, a way station for travelers heading west. If they could reach it. How do you know about Fort Bridger? She asked. Thomas hesitated. Just a beat too long. I've been through there before. When? A few years back. Doing what? His jaw tightened. Does it matter? It might. For a long moment they stared at each other. Martha could feel the others watching, feel the tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. Finally Thomas looked away. I was a scout. For the army. Before I... left. Resigned. The word came out flat final. I don't work for them anymore. Martha wanted to push further, but something in his face stopped her. There were secrets there buried deep. Secrets that might matter. But not tonight. Tonight they had shelter and food and a fire that wasn't trying to kill them, and that was enough. We'll talk about Fort Bridger later, she said. Right now, we need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Every day out here is hard, Agnes muttered. Then we better get used to it. The night was quieter than the one before. Martha lay awake listening to the breathing of the others. Agnes snored softly near the fire. The children were tangled together in a pile of blankets, their small bodies generating what little heat they could. Jake slept near the entrance, one hand still resting on the hatchet. Sarah Jane was awake. Martha could tell by the rhythm of her breathing, the way she kept shifting on the hard ground. Can't sleep, Martha whispered. No. What's wrong? A long pause. Then, I keep thinking about the fire. What would have happened if it had spread? If we'd all been asleep? We weren't. Thomas stopped it. But what if he hadn't been awake? What if... We can't live in what-ifs. Martha's voice was firm but gentle. We can only live in what is. And what is right now is that we're alive. All of us. That's what matters. Sarah Jane was quiet for a moment. Then, You're very strong, Mrs. Brennan. I'm not strong. I'm just too stubborn to die. A soft laugh barely audible. That might be the same thing. Martha almost smiled. Maybe it was. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the baby had other ideas. It kicked and squirmed, pressing against her bladder, her ribs, her spine. Every position was uncomfortable. Every breath was an effort. 3 weeks, she told herself. 3 weeks until the baby was due. She just had to hold on for 3 more weeks. But even as she thought it, she felt something shift. A strange tightness in her belly, different from the usual kicks and movements. A pressure that came and went in waves. No, she thought. Not yet. Not now. She pressed her hand against her stomach and willed the feeling to stop. It was just exhaustion. Just stress. The baby wasn't coming yet. It couldn't be. The pressure eased. Martha let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Just a few more weeks. That was all she needed. Dawn came gray and cold. Martha woke to the sound of voices outside the shelter. Thomas and Jake talking in low tones. She pushed herself up, wincing at the stiffness in her joints, and made her way to the entrance. What's wrong? Thomas turned. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed. Tracks. What kind of tracks? Wolf. A whole pack from the look of it. They circled the camp sometime during the night. Martha's blood went cold. They didn't try to get in. Not yet, but they know we're here. They'll be back. Jake was pale, his hands shaking. "What do we do?" "We keep the fire burning," Thomas said. "Wolves don't like fire, and we don't go anywhere alone, not for any reason." Martha nodded. "Everyone stays inside unless absolutely necessary. Jake, you and Thomas take turns keeping watch. Agnes, start rationing the food more carefully. We might be trapped here longer than we thought." "And if they attack?" Sarah Jane had appeared behind her, Emma and Daniel clinging to her skirts. "They won't," Thomas said. "Not if we're careful. Wolves are smart. They won't risk a fight they might not win." "But if they do?" Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all knew what would happen if the wolves decided they were worth the risk. The day passed in tense silence. Martha kept everyone working more to keep their minds occupied than because there was anything urgent to do. Agnes mended clothes. Sarah Jane told stories to the children. Jake sharpened every blade they had until they gleamed. Thomas patrolled the perimeter, never straying far, but never staying still. Every few minutes Martha caught him scanning the horizon, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The wolves didn't come. But that night, as they huddled around the fire, eating the last of the rabbit stew, they heard them. Howling in the distance, a chorus of voices that rose and fell like a mournful song. Daniel started crying. Emma pulled him close and whispered something in his ear, but her own face was white with fear. "They're just talking to each other," Thomas said. "It doesn't mean anything." "It means they're hungry," Agnes said flatly. "Same as us." "Then let's make sure we're not worth the trouble." Martha looked at him. "How?" Thomas stood and walked to his pack. He rummaged through it for a moment, then pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, Martha saw a pistol. "You said that didn't work," she said sharply. "I said it didn't fire reliably. Doesn't mean it won't make noise." He loaded it with hands that moved from long practice. Wolves don't know the difference between a warning shot and a kill shot. They hear a gun, they run. And if they don't, then we fight. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like fighting a pack of wolves with a broken pistol and a handful of knives was just another problem to be solved. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this could go wrong. But the howling was getting closer, and she didn't have any better ideas. "Fine," she said. "But nobody goes outside alone, not even to relieve themselves. We use the corner of the shelter if we have to." Agnes wrinkled her nose. "That's disgusting. Being eaten by wolves is worse." The old woman couldn't argue with that. They slept in shifts that night. Martha took the first watch, sitting near the entrance with a knife in her hand and her ears straining for any sound. The howling had stopped, which was somehow worse than when it had been constant. Silence meant the wolves were close. Silence meant they were hunting. Halfway through her watch, she felt the tightening in her belly again. This time it was stronger. A band of pressure that wrapped around her middle and squeezed, stealing her breath. She gripped the knife harder and waited for it to pass. It did, eventually. But it left her shaking. "Not yet," she told herself again. "Please, not yet." Thomas appeared beside her, his footsteps so quiet she hadn't heard him approach. "You should rest," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not. You're pale as snow, and your hands are shaking." Martha looked down at her hands. He was right. She was shaking. From cold, from fear, from the cramping in her belly that wouldn't quite go away. "It's nothing," she said. "It's not nothing." Thomas crouched beside her, his voice low. "I've seen women in labor before. I know what it looks like. I'm not in labor. Not yet, but you're close." He met her eyes. "When were you planning to tell the others?" Martha's throat tightened. "When I had to, not before." "And if it happens tomorrow or tonight?" "Then we deal with it. Same as everything else." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the knife from her hand. "Go sleep. I'll take the rest of the watch." "I said I'm fine. And I said go sleep." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "You're the only thing holding this group together, Mrs. Brennan. If you collapse, we all do. So rest. That's an order." Martha wanted to argue, but she was tired, so tired, and the cramping was getting worse, and maybe he was right. Maybe she needed to rest while she still could. She handed him the knife and made her way back to her spot against the wall. The baby kicked once hard and then went still. Martha pressed her hand against her belly and closed her eyes. 3 weeks, she thought. Just 3 more weeks. But deep down she knew. She'd known since that morning, since the first wave of pressure had wrapped around her middle and squeezed. The baby wasn't going to wait 3 weeks. The baby was coming soon. And out here in the middle of nowhere, with wolves circling and food running out and no help for 40 miles in any direction, Martha didn't know if any of them would survive what came next. The pain woke her before dawn. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her belly as a wave of pressure crashed through her body. This wasn't like before. This wasn't a warning. This was real. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She tried to sit up, but another contraction hit before she could move. Her teeth clenched. Sweat broke across her forehead despite the cold. Thomas was at her side in seconds. "It's happening." "It can't be. It's too early." "Tell that to the baby." Martha grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "Get Agnes. Now." He didn't argue. He crossed the shelter in 3 strides and shook the old woman awake. Agnes came up swearing, but her eyes sharpened when she saw Martha's face. "How far apart?" Agnes demanded, already moving. "I don't know. A few minutes, maybe less." "Water. We need hot water." Agnes snapped her fingers at Jake, who had bolted upright at the commotion. "Boy, get the fire going higher. Sarah Jane, find every clean cloth we have." The shelter erupted into motion. Martha tried to focus on breathing, but the contractions were coming faster, now rolling through her in waves that left her gasping. "It's too soon," she said through gritted teeth. "The baby. Babies come when they want to come." Agnes knelt beside her and pressed a hand to her belly. "This one wants to come now, so we're going to help it." Emma and Daniel had woken up, their eyes wide with fear. Sarah Jane gathered them quickly and pulled them to the far corner of the shelter. "Don't look," she whispered. "Just stay with me." Another contraction. Martha cried out, unable to hold it back. The pain was enormous, all-consuming, like her body was being torn apart from the inside. "Breathe," Agnes commanded. "Deep breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth." "I can't." "You can. You will. This baby needs you to breathe." Martha forced herself to focus. In, out. In, out. The pain didn't lessen, but she found a rhythm within it, a way to ride the waves instead of being crushed by them. Thomas appeared with a pot of water, steam rising from the surface. "What else?" "Your knife. Boil it." He didn't ask why. He just obeyed. The next hour was a blur of pain and sweat, and Agnes's voice cutting through it all like a lifeline. The old woman had done this before, Martha realized dimly. Maybe many times. Her hands were steady, her instructions clear. "Push when I tell you. Not before." "I need to push now." "Not yet. Trust me." Martha wanted to scream, wanted to curse, wanted to demand that this be over, that the pain stop, that her body stop betraying her. But she bit down on the leather strap Agnes had given her and waited. "Now," Agnes said. "Push now." Martha pushed. The world narrowed to a single point of agony. Again. Harder. She pushed again. And again. And again. "I can see the head," Agnes said. "One more. Give me one more." Martha gathered everything she had left, every ounce of strength, every drop of will, and pushed. The baby came. For one terrible moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that stops hearts, that freezes time, that makes you believe the worst has happened. Then a cry, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. Martha sobbed, reaching for the sound. Agnes placed the baby in her arms, a tiny, squirming thing, red-faced and furious at being forced into the world. "A girl," Agnes said. Her voice was rough, but Martha caught the glimmer of tears in her eyes. "You have a daughter." Martha looked down at the baby in her arms, so small, so fragile, so impossibly perfect. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." The name came without thought, like it had been waiting all along. Hope. For Samuel, who had believed they'd make it to Oregon. For the baby born in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. For all of them clinging to survival in a hole in the ground while winter tried to kill them. Thomas knelt beside her. "She's beautiful. She's alive." Martha's voice cracked. "That's all that matters." But even as she said it, she felt something wrong. A wetness spreading beneath her. A weakness that went beyond exhaustion. Agnes's face changed. "Thomas, more cloth. Now." "What's wrong?" Martha tried to sit up, but the room spun. "You're bleeding. Stay still." "How bad?" Agnes didn't answer. That was answer enough. Martha looked down and saw the blood soaking through the blankets beneath her. Dark red, almost black in the firelight. Too much. Far too much. "Take her," she said, pushing Hope toward Sarah Jane. "Take the baby. Mrs. Brennan. Take her." Sarah Jane gathered Hope into her arms, her face white with fear. The baby was still crying, her tiny fists waving in the air. Agnes was pressing cloth between Martha's legs, but the blood kept coming. Her hands were red to the wrists. "We have to stop this," Thomas said. His voice was steady, but Martha could hear the fear beneath it. "I know." Agnes's jaw was tight. "I know. What do you need? A miracle." Martha felt herself slipping. The edges of her vision were going gray. The sounds around her, the baby's cries, Agnes's commands. Thomas's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't let me go." Thomas grabbed her hand. "You're not going anywhere. You hear me? You built this place. You saved all of us. You don't get to die now. The baby. We'll have her mother. I promise you." Martha wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to his words like a rope thrown across a chasm. But the darkness was pulling at her, dragging her down into a place where there was no pain, no cold, no fear. "Hot iron." Agnes's voice cut through the fog. "We need something to cauterize. It's the only way." "That could kill her." "She's dying anyway. This is the only chance." Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fire poker from beside the pit and plunged it into the flames. The iron glowed red within seconds. Martha understood what was about to happen. She'd heard stories of battlefield surgeons, of desperate measures in desperate times. She knew how much it would hurt. "Do it," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Agnes looked at her. "Are you sure?" "Do it before I lose my nerve." Thomas pulled the iron from the fire. The tip was orange-white, pulsing with heat. "Hold her down," Agnes ordered. Jake appeared, his face pale but determined. He pressed Martha's shoulders to the ground. Sarah Jane handed Hope to Emma and rushed over to hold Martha's legs. "I'm sorry," Agnes said. "This is going to hurt." "I know." The iron touched her. Martha screamed. The sound tore from her throat like something being ripped out by the roots. Pain beyond pain, agony beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Her back arched off the ground. Her hands clawed at the earth. The smell of burning flesh filled the shelter. Daniel started crying. Emma was saying something, maybe praying, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate stream. And then it was over. Agnes pulled the iron away. Thomas dropped it into the snow. Jake released Martha's shoulders and stumbled back, looking like he might be sick. Martha lay still, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The pain was still there, but duller now, like an echo of what it had been. "The bleeding," she managed. "Did it stop?" Agnes checked. Her hands were shaking. "Yes," she said. "It stopped." Martha closed her eyes. Tears leaked down her temples and pooled in her ears. "My baby," she whispered. "Bring me my baby." Sarah Jane brought Hope and laid her gently on Martha's chest. The infant had stopped crying, her tiny face scrunched up in sleep, her fist curled against her mother's heart. Martha wrapped her arms around her daughter and held on. She didn't know how long she slept. When she woke, the shelter was quiet. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the canvas walls. Someone had covered her with every blanket they had, and Hope was still nestled against her chest, breathing softly. Thomas sat nearby, whittling something from a piece of wood. He looked up when she stirred. "You're awake." "How long?" "About 6 hours. Agnes wanted to let you rest." Martha tried to sit up, but pain shot through her abdomen, and she fell back with a gasp. "Easy." Thomas moved to help her. "You lost a lot of blood. You need to take it slow." "I can't take it slow. There's too much to do." "There's nothing to do right now except heal." His voice was firm. "The shelter's holding, the fire's burning, everyone's fed. You did your part. Now let the rest of us do ours." Martha wanted to argue, but she didn't have the strength. She looked down at Hope, still sleeping, her tiny chest rising and falling. "She's perfect," Thomas said quietly. "Agnes says she's small but healthy. Good lungs, strong grip. Samuel would have loved her." The words came out before Martha could stop them. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. "Tell me about him." "What?" "Your husband. Tell me about him. What was he like?" Martha hesitated. Talking about Samuel felt like touching a wound that hadn't healed. But something in Thomas's voice made her want to try. "He was stubborn," she said finally. "Stubborn and loud, and always convinced he was right about everything. We argued constantly. About the route west, about how to pack the wagon, about what to name the baby." She laughed softly. "He wanted to name her after his mother, Gertrude." Thomas's lips twitched. "Gertrude. I told him over my dead body. He said that could be arranged." She shook her head. "That was the last real conversation we had before the fever took him. Fighting over a name." "What would he think of Hope?" Martha looked down at her daughter. "He'd say it was too sentimental. He'd say you can't name a child after an abstract concept." She touched Hope's cheek. "And then he'd hold her and cry and tell everyone she was the most beautiful baby ever born." Silence fell between them. The fire crackled. The wind whispered against the canvas. "I had a daughter once," Thomas said. Martha looked at him sharply. "What?" "Before the war. Her name was Elizabeth. We called her Lizzie." His hands had stopped moving on the wood. "She was 3 when I left for the army. 4 when the fever took her and her mother both. I didn't find out until 6 months later." "Thomas, I'm not telling you this for sympathy." His voice was flat, but Martha could hear the old pain beneath it. "I'm telling you because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know what it's like to keep going anyway. Not because you want to, but because there's nothing else to do." Martha didn't know what to say, so she reached out and touched his hand. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said, "for saving my life." "Agnes saved your life. You both did, all of you." She looked around the shelter at the sleeping forms of Jake and Sarah Jane, and the children at Agnes, snoring softly near the fire. "We saved each other." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went back to his whittling. Martha settled back against her blankets and watched the firelight dance on the canvas walls. She was alive. Her daughter was alive. They were still trapped, still hungry, still at the mercy of the cold. But they were alive. For now, that was enough. The next morning brought new trouble. Martha was still too weak to stand, but she could hear the voices outside the shelter. Thomas and Jake arguing about something. She strained to make out the words. "Can't wait any longer. The snow's piling up. She can't travel, not in her condition. Then we leave her and come back with help. I'm not leaving anyone behind." The canvas flap opened, and Thomas ducked inside. His face was grim. "What is it?" Martha demanded. "The food's running out faster than we thought. The jerky's almost gone and Jake's snares have been empty for 2 days. How long do we have?" 3 days, maybe 4 if we stretch it." Martha's stomach dropped. 3 days. 4 at most. And she couldn't even stand up. "You have to go," she said. "To Fort Bridger. Get supplies and come back." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to. It's the only way." Thomas shook his head. 40 miles in winter alone. I might not make it back in time." "Then take Jake with you. And leave 3 women, 2 children, and a newborn with no protection. What if the wolves come back? What if we all starve?" Martha's voice rose. "At least this way, some of us have a chance." Agnes had woken up during the argument. She pushed herself to her feet and walked over to join them. "She's right," Agnes said. "You have to go, both of you." "Agnes?" "I know how to use a gun. Sarah Jane's tougher than she looks, and Mrs. Brennan will be back on her feet in a day or 2 whether she likes it or not." Agnes crossed her arms. "We can hold out for a week if we have to. Can you make it to Fort Bridger and back in a week?" Thomas hesitated. "If the weather holds, if the trail's passable." "That's not a yes." "It's the best I can give you." Martha looked at Agnes, then at Thomas. She hated this. Hated being weak, being dependent, being the reason they had to split up. But Agnes was right. They didn't have a choice. "Go," she said. "Today, before the next storm hits." Thomas held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll be back," he said. "I promise." "Don't promise. Just come back." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." 2 hours later, Thomas and Jake stood at the edge of the camp packs on their backs, dressed in every layer they could spare. Jake looked scared but determined. Thomas looked like a man walking toward something he wasn't sure he'd survive. Martha had made Sarah Jane help her to the shelter entrance so she could see them off. Hope was bundled against her chest, sleeping soundly. "Stay on the ridgeline," Agnes was saying. "Avoid the valleys, that's where the drifts are deepest. And if you see wolf tracks, don't stop moving." "We know," Thomas said. "I'm telling you again anyway." Thomas looked past Agnes to Martha. Something passed between them, something unspoken. "Take care of them," he said. "Take care of yourself." He turned and started walking. Jake followed, glancing back once before disappearing over the ridge. Martha watched until she couldn't see them anymore. Then she let Sarah Jane help her back inside. The shelter felt emptier without them, smaller, more fragile. "Will they make it?" Emma asked in a small voice. Martha looked at the girl. 7 years old, and already carrying fears no child should have to carry. "Yes," she said. "They'll make it." She didn't know if it was true. But hope was all any of them had left. And now it had a name. The first day without the men was the hardest. Martha forced herself to sit up, then to stand, then to take a few steps around the shelter. Each movement sent fire through her abdomen, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. "You're going to tear yourself open," Agnes warned. "I'll stop when I can't go anymore." "Stubborn woman." "You say that like it's a bad thing." By afternoon she could walk from one end of the shelter to the other without needing to rest. By evening, she was helping Sarah Jane sort through their remaining supplies. "Half a pound of beans," Sarah Jane said, holding up a nearly empty sack. "A handful of dried apples. Some cornmeal, but most of it's gone moldy. We'll eat around the mold. And the jerky. Save it for the children. They need it more than we do. Sarah Jane looked at her with worried eyes. Mrs. Brennan, you just had a baby. You need to eat too. I'll eat when there's food to spare. Right now there isn't. The argument was cut short by a sound from outside. A howl, long and mournful, echoing across the empty plains. Everyone froze. They're back, Emma whispered. Martha moved to the shelter entrance and pushed aside the flap. The sun was setting, painting the snow orange and red, and there on the ridge to the north she could see them, dark shapes against the fading light. 5 of them, maybe 6. The wolves had returned. Get the gun, Martha said quietly. Agnes brought Thomas's pistol and handed it over. Martha checked the chamber. 2 bullets left. Not enough. Everyone stay inside. Don't make any noise. She stood in the entrance, the gun in her hand, and watched the wolves watch her. They didn't come closer, not yet. But they didn't leave either. They just sat there patient and hungry, waiting for their moment. Martha raised the gun and pointed it at the sky. What are you doing? Agnes hissed. Letting them know we're not easy prey. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the plains like thunder. The wolves scattered, vanishing over the ridge in seconds. Martha lowered the gun. 1 bullet left. Will they come back? Sarah Jane asked. Yes. Martha stepped back inside and let the flap fall closed. But not tonight. Tonight they'll remember that sound and stay away. And tomorrow? Martha didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, Hope woke crying every few hours, hungry for milk that Martha's body was struggling to produce. She nursed as best she could, but she could feel herself weakening. The lack of food, the loss of blood, the constant effort of keeping everyone alive, it was draining her faster than she could recover. Agnes noticed. Of course she did. You need to rest more. I'll rest when we're safe. You'll rest now, or you won't live to see safe. Agnes's voice was sharp. That baby needs a mother. So do those children. So does this whole damn group. You die and we all fall apart. Is that what you want? Martha's temper flared. I'm doing the best I can. No, you're doing everything you think needs to be done whether you can do it or not. That's not the same thing. Agnes leaned closer. Let us help. That's what we're here for. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was fine, that she could handle it, that she didn't need anyone's help. But she couldn't, because Agnes was right. Fine, she said quietly. Tell me what to do. Sleep. Eat what we give you. Let Sarah Jane watch the entrance tonight. Let Emma and Daniel feel useful. And hold that baby as much as you can, because right now, that's the most important thing you can do. Martha looked down at Hope sleeping peacefully against her chest. So small, so fragile, so completely dependent on her. All right, she said. All right. She closed her eyes and let herself rest. But even in her dreams, she could hear the wolves howling. 3 days passed with no sign of Thomas and Jake. Martha stood at the shelter entrance every morning, scanning the horizon, until her eyes burned from the glare of sun on snow. Nothing. No movement. No dark shapes against the white. Just emptiness, stretching in every direction. They should be halfway there by now, Agnes said on the 3rd morning. If the weather held. And if it didn't. Agnes didn't answer. The food was nearly gone. Martha had stretched their rations as far as possible, but there was only so much stretching you could do with half a pound of beans and a handful of moldy cornmeal. The children had stopped asking when they would eat next. That scared her more than the hunger itself. Hope was the only one who didn't seem to notice. She slept and nursed and cried and slept again, oblivious to the desperation closing in around her. Martha envied her that ignorance. We need to do something, Sarah Jane said. Her voice was thin-strained. We can't just sit here and wait to starve. What do you suggest? The snares. Jake showed me where he set them before he left. Maybe something's been caught. Martha shook her head. The wolves are still out there. I won't let you go alone. Then come with me. I can barely walk to the entrance without my legs giving out. So I'll go alone. No. Mrs. Brennan. I said no. Martha's voice cracked like a whip. I've already lost too many people. I won't lose you too. Sarah Jane's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She just turned and walked to the far corner of the shelter, her shoulders rigid with frustration. Agnes watched her go, then looked at Martha. She's right, you know. We have to try something. I know. Martha pressed her hand against her forehead. Her skin was clammy, feverish. The wound from the cauterization was healing, but slowly. Too slowly. I know we do. I just don't know what. Then figure it out. That's what you do, isn't it? Figure things out when the rest of us can't. Martha wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. She was so tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of making decisions. Tired of holding everyone together while she fell apart inside. But Agnes was right. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Not yet. Fine, she said. I'll check the snares myself. You can barely stand. Then I'll crawl if I have to. Agnes opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Something in Martha's eyes must have told her it was pointless. At least take the gun, Agnes said. There's only one bullet left. Then make it count. Martha bundled Hope in extra blankets and handed her to Sarah Jane. The girl's face softened when she took the baby, her anger melting into something gentler. I'll take care of her, Sarah Jane said. I know you will. Martha pulled on her coat. Samuel's coat, really the one she'd taken from his body after he died, and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a fist. She gasped, her lungs burning, and forced herself to keep moving. One step, then another, then another. The snares were about 200 yards from the shelter near a cluster of dead brush where Jake had said rabbits liked to hide. It wasn't far. On a normal day, Martha could have walked it in a few minutes. Today it took her nearly half an hour. Every step was agony. Her legs shook. Her vision swam. The wound in her belly throbbed with every heartbeat. But she kept going because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready to die. She reached the first snare and found it empty. The second was the same. The third had been triggered, but whatever had set it off was long gone. Martha knelt in the snow, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Empty. All of them empty. They were going to starve after all. Then she heard it. A sound behind her. Soft. Deliberate. The crunch of snow under something heavy. She turned slowly, her hand moving to the pistol at her belt. The wolf stood 10 feet away. It was huge. Gray and silver with yellow eyes that gleamed in the pale sunlight. It watched her with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. Martha's hand closed around the gun. One bullet. One chance. Go away, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Go on. Get out of here. The wolf didn't move. Martha pulled the gun from her belt and raised it. Her hand was shaking. She couldn't stop it from shaking. I said go away. The wolf took a step forward. Martha's finger tightened on the trigger. She couldn't miss. If she missed, she was dead. Hope would grow up without a mother. The others would be next. She couldn't miss. The wolf took another step. Martha fired. The sound split the air. The wolf yelped and stumbled, blood blooming on its shoulder. Not a killing shot. She'd aimed for the chest and hit the leg, but enough. Enough to make it turn and run, limping badly, disappearing into the white. Martha stood there, shaking, the empty gun still raised. Her ears were ringing. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She'd survived. Barely. But she'd survived. Then she heard the howling. Not one wolf. Not two. A whole pack answering their wounded companion's cry. Martha dropped the gun and ran. She didn't remember the journey back. Didn't remember falling twice, scrambling up, forcing her legs to move when they screamed at her to stop. All she knew was terror, pure and absolute, driving her forward. She burst through the shelter entrance and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. "Martha!" Agnes was at her side in an instant. "What happened? We heard a shot." "Wolves!" Martha gasped. "Coming! We have to! Slow down. Breathe. There's no time." Martha grabbed Agnes's arm. "The fire. Build it up, as high as it'll go. Block the entrance with everything we have." Sarah Jane was already moving, pulling crates and boards toward the door. Emma and Daniel huddled in the corner, clutching each other. "How many?" Agnes asked. "I don't know. A lot. I shot one, but you shot it. Wounded it. They're angry now." Agnes's face went pale. "Lord help us." They worked frantically, piling everything they could find against the entrance. The fire roared, higher flames licking at the canvas ceiling. Smoke filled the shelter, making their eyes water. Then the howling stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. Martha stood at the blocked entrance, a kitchen knife in her hand, straining to hear. Nothing. Just the crackle of the fire and the whimper of frightened children. "Are they gone?" Sarah Jane whispered. "I don't know." Minutes passed. Each one felt like an hour. Then something hit the wall. Emma screamed. Daniel buried his face in his sister's shoulder. Sarah Jane grabbed Hope and held her tight. Another hit. Then another. The wolves were testing the walls, looking for weak spots. "They're trying to get in," Agnes said. Her voice was remarkably calm. "They won't." Martha's grip tightened on the knife. "We built this place strong. They can't break through." A board cracked. One of the planks near the floor splintered under the impact of something heavy. "You were saying..." Martha grabbed another board and jammed it against the weakening spot. "Help me. Hold this." Agnes added her weight. Sarah Jane passed Hope to Emma and joined them. The wolves hit the wall again. The board buckled but held. "How long can they keep this up?" Sarah Jane asked. "Longer than us," Agnes said grimly. They stood there, three women holding a wall against a pack of hungry predators, while smoke filled their lungs, and children cried behind them. Martha thought about Samuel, about the promises she'd made, about Hope just days old who might never see her first spring. She thought about giving up. Then she pushed the thought away and held the wall tighter. The attack went on for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably less than one. But time lost all meaning in that desperate struggle, measured only in impacts against the walls and the burning in their muscles. Finally, the hits stopped. Martha waited, not daring to move. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, 2, 5. "Are they gone?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Martha pressed her ear against the wall. Nothing. No movement. No breathing. No scrape of claws on wood. "I think so," she said slowly. "I think they gave up." Agnes sagged against the wall, her face gray with exhaustion. "They'll be back." "Probably, but not tonight." Martha turned to look at the others. Sarah Jane was shaking. Emma and Daniel were crying silently. Hope was somehow still asleep, oblivious to how close they'd all come to dying. "We made it," Martha said. "We held them off. That's something." "Something isn't enough," Agnes said. "If Thomas and Jake don't come back, they'll come back. You don't know that." "I have to believe it." Martha's voice hardened. "Faith is all we have left. I won't give it up." Agnes looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "All right. Faith it is." They spent the rest of the night repairing the wall. Nobody slept. Nobody could. Every sound made them freeze, listening for the return of the wolves. But the attack didn't come again. Dawn arrived, pale and cold. Martha stepped outside for the first time since the attack. The snow around the shelter was churned up, covered in paw prints and blood. Her blood from the falls during her run back, and the wolf's blood from where she'd shot it. She followed the tracks with her eyes. They led off to the north toward the ridge. The pack had retreated, but Agnes was right. They would be back. Martha looked at the horizon. Still no sign of Thomas and Jake. 5 days now. They should have reached Fort Bridger by now. Should be on their way back. If they were still alive. She pushed the thought away and went back inside. We need to reinforce everything, she said. Every wall, every seam, and we need weapons. Real weapons, not kitchen knives. How? Sarah Jane asked. We've used everything we have. Then we use it better. Sharpen the wagon spokes into spears. Take apart the sled runners and make clubs, anything that can hurt a wolf if it gets inside. They worked all day. Martha pushed herself beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, beyond anything she thought she could endure. By nightfall, they had a small arsenal of crude weapons lined up against the wall. Will it be enough? Emma asked. She was holding a sharpened stick almost as tall as she was. It'll have to be. That night, they kept the fire burning high and took turns watching the entrance. Martha took the last shift, sitting with Hope in her arms and a makeshift spear across her knees. The wolves didn't come, but something else did. It was nearly dawn when Martha heard it. A sound different from the wind, different from animals. Voices. She stood up so fast she nearly dropped Hope. Her heart was hammering. Agnes. Agnes, wake up. The old woman came awake instantly. What is it? Listen. They both listened. The voices were clearer now. Men's voices calling out. Martha, Agnes! Anyone there? Martha's legs gave out. She sat down hard, tears streaming down her face. They came back, she whispered. They came back. Agnes was already at the entrance pulling aside the barricade. Thomas, Jake. Over here. Two figures emerged from the pre-dawn gloom. Thomas was limping badly, leaning on a makeshift crutch. Jake's face was frostbitten, his lips cracked and bleeding, but they were alive, and they weren't alone. Behind them came 3 more men on horseback leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Soldiers, from the look of their uniforms. Fort Bridger had sent help. Thomas collapsed just inside the shelter entrance. Martha crawled to him, hope still clutched to her chest. You made it, she said. You actually made it. Told you I'd come back. His voice was a rasp. Told you. What happened your leg? Fell through some ice about 20 miles out. Jake pulled me out, but my ankle's busted. We had to crawl the last 5 miles to the fort. He laughed weakly. They didn't believe us at first. Thought we were crazy talking about a pregnant woman who built a shelter out of broken wagons. Had to beg them to come. Jake had made his way to Sarah Jane's side. She was crying, her arms wrapped around him, not caring that everyone was watching. You're safe now, Thomas said. All of you. The soldiers are going to help us get to the fort. There's food and medicine and... He stopped. His eyes had found Hope, bundled against Martha's chest. Is that? Your daughter, Agnes said dryly. Born about 4 days after you left. Nearly killed her mother in the process, but they're both still here. Thomas reached out with a trembling hand and touched Hope's cheek. The baby stirred her tiny fingers wrapping around his. She's beautiful, he whispered. Her name is Hope. Something shifted in Thomas's face. Something cracked open. Hope, he repeated. That's a good name. Martha watched him, this broken man, who'd lost his own daughter years ago, holding her child with such tenderness it made her chest ache. Thank you, she said, for coming back, for not giving up. You didn't give up either, any of you. He looked around the shelter at the reinforced walls and the crude weapons and the exhausted faces of the people who'd survived against impossible odds. I've never seen anything like this. What you built here. We built it together. But you led them. You kept them alive. Martha shook her head. I just did what needed doing. Same as you. Same as all of us. The soldiers came in then bringing food and blankets and the promise of safety. The children fell on the supplies like they'd never seen food before. Agnes actually smiled a real smile for the first time since Martha had met her. And Martha sat in the middle of it all, holding her daughter, watching the people she'd fought to keep alive, finally able to rest. They'd made it. Against every odd, against winter and wolves and starvation, they'd made it. But even as relief washed over her, she knew this wasn't the end. Fort Bridger was 40 miles away. They still had to get there. She still had to heal. Hope still had to survive her first weeks of life. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. One of the soldiers, a young man with kind eyes and a thick beard, approached Martha with a cup of hot broth. "Ma'am, you need to eat. You look like you haven't had a real meal in weeks." "I haven't." He pressed the cup into her hands. "Drink, slowly. Your stomach won't be able to handle much at first." Martha took a sip. The broth was thin, barely more than salted water, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Warmth spread through her chest, her stomach, her limbs. "The sergeant wants to move out tomorrow morning," the soldier said. "Get everyone to the fort before the next storm hits. Tomorrow, some of us can barely walk. We've got horses, and a wagon for the ones who can't ride." He glanced at Thomas, who was being tended by another soldier. "Your man there told us what you all went through. I've been stationed at Bridger for 3 years, ma'am. I've seen a lot of people die in winters like this. Never seen anyone survive what you survived." Martha looked at him. "We didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice. Most people choose to give up." He touched the brim of his hat. "You didn't. That's something worth remembering." He walked away before she could respond. Martha drank more broth and watched the activity around her. The shelter that had been their prison and their salvation was now filled with life, with hope, with the promise of tomorrow. She looked down at her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Hope's tiny hand flexed, reaching for something in her dreams. Martha smiled and held her closer. Outside, the wind had stopped. For the first time in weeks, the plains were silent, and somewhere in that silence, Martha could have sworn she heard Samuel's voice. "Well done," he seemed to say. "Well done, my love." She closed her eyes and let herself believe it. The morning they left the shelter, Martha looked back one last time. The structure stood half buried in snow, a strange monument of broken wagons and patched canvas. It looked impossible, ugly, like something that should have collapsed the first night, but it hadn't. It had held. Against blizzards and wolves and desperation, it had held. "Mrs. Brennan." The sergeant's voice was gentle. "We need to move. Storm's coming." Martha nodded and turned away. She climbed into the wagon they'd brought, settling hope against her chest. The baby was awake for once, her dark eyes watching everything with quiet curiosity. "You won't remember any of this," Martha whispered. "But I will. I'll remember enough for both of us." The wagon lurched forward. Around her, the others were finding their places. Agnes rode one of the horses, her back straight, despite her exhaustion. Sarah Jane and the children huddled together in the wagon bed. Jake walked alongside, too restless to sit still. Thomas had been loaded into a makeshift litter, his broken ankle splinted and wrapped. They were a ragged group, thin, battered, frost-scarred, but they were alive. The journey to Fort Bridger took 3 days. 3 days of slow progress through snow that sometimes reached the horses' bellies. 3 days of rationed food and shared blankets, and the constant fear that the weather would turn before they reached safety. But the storms held off. For once, luck was on their side. On the second night, they made camp in a shallow valley protected from the wind. The soldiers set up tents and built fires, and for the first time in weeks, Martha felt something close to warmth. Thomas had been moved to a tent of his own, his ankle tended by the expedition's medic. Martha found herself drawn to him after everyone else had settled. "How's the leg?" she asked, ducking through the tent flap. "Still attached, that's something." He shifted to make room for her. "How's Hope?" "Sleeping. Finally." Martha sat down heavily, her body aching. "Sarah Jane's watching her." That girl's good with children. She's good at everything. I don't think she knows it yet." Silence fell between them. The fire crackled outside. Voices drifted from the other tents, low and tired. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said finally. "Go ahead." "What are you going to do after we reach the fort?" Martha had been asking herself the same question. "I don't know. Oregon was Samuel's dream, not mine. I just followed because I loved him. And now? Now I have a daughter to think about. A future to build." She looked at him. "What about you? Where will you go?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I've been running for a long time. From the war. From what happened to my family. From myself mostly." He met her eyes. "I'm tired of running." "So what will you do?" "I don't know. But I'd like to find out." He hesitated. "I'd like to find out somewhere near you and Hope. If you'd let me." Martha's heart skipped. She wasn't ready for this conversation. Wasn't ready to think about anything beyond survival. But she looked at Thomas, this broken man, who'd walked 40 miles on a shattered ankle to bring back help, who'd saved her life and her daughter's life, who'd lost everything and kept going anyway, and she felt something shift inside her. "We can talk about it," she said carefully. "When we're safe, when we've had time to heal. That's all I'm asking." She nodded and stood to leave. At the tent flap she paused. "Thomas?" "Yes. Thank you for everything." He almost smiled. "Thank you for letting me help." Martha returned to the wagon where Hope was sleeping and lay down beside her daughter. The baby's breathing was soft and steady, a tiny rhythm against the vast silence of the night. Tomorrow they would reach the fort. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, Martha let herself rest. Fort Bridger appeared on the horizon late on the third day. It wasn't much to look at. A cluster of buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade, smoke rising from chimneys, the American flag snapping in the wind. But to Martha, it looked like salvation. The gates opened as they approached. People poured out to meet them, soldiers and settlers alike, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Lord Almighty," a woman said, staring at their ragged group. "What happened to you people?" "Winter," Agnes said dryly. "Winter happened." They were taken to the main building, a combination of trading post and military headquarters. A fire blazed in the enormous hearth. Hot food appeared on tables. Blankets were pressed into their hands. Martha sat in a chair near the fire, Hope cradled in her arms, and let the warmth sink into her bones. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't cold, wasn't hungry, wasn't afraid. It felt strange, almost wrong. The post commander, a weathered man named Colonel Harris, approached her. "Mrs. Brennan, I'd like to hear your account of what happened. When you're ready." "I'm ready now." She told him everything: the broken wagon train, the deaths, the decision to build rather than surrender, the birth, the wolves, all of it. When she finished, Colonel Harris was silent for a long moment. "I've been at this post for 12 years, he said finally. "I've seen a lot of people come through these gates, survivors, refugees, dreamers. I've never heard a story like yours. I did what I had to do. You did more than that." He leaned forward. "Mrs. Brennan, I'd like to offer you and your people a place here, at least until spring. We have room, and frankly, we could use people with your kind of grit." Martha looked around the room, at Agnes already arguing with the cook about the proper way to make biscuits, at Sarah Jane helping Emma and Daniel with their food, at Jake talking animatedly with some young soldiers, at Thomas watching her from across the room with something like hope in his eyes. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." But Martha already knew her answer. The first week at Fort Bridger was a blur of recovery. Martha slept more than she'd slept in months, ate more than she'd eaten in weeks, let the post's doctor examine her wound and declare it healing well. Watched Hope grow stronger every day, her cries louder, her grip tighter. The others recovered too. Agnes became a fixture in the kitchen, terrorizing the cooks and somehow improving every meal. Sarah Jane was recruited to help with the children at the post, her quiet competence quickly making her indispensable. Jake started working with the blacksmith, discovering a talent for metalwork he'd never known he had. And Thomas healed. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. By the end of the second week, he was walking with a crutch. By the third, he was helping with repairs around the fort. Martha watched all of this with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. They were building new lives, these people who'd nearly died together. Finding new purposes. Moving forward. She wasn't sure she was ready to move forward. One evening, she stood outside the fort walls watching the sun set over the mountains. Hope was sleeping in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Sarah Jane had knitted. "You're thinking too hard." She turned. Thomas had come up behind her, his crutch leaving marks in the snow. "I'm always thinking too hard. I know. It's one of the things I—" He stopped himself. "One of the things I admire about you." Martha smiled faintly. "You were going to say something else." "I was going to say a lot of things. But we agreed to wait until we're healed." "Are we healed?" Thomas looked at her. Really looked the way he had that first day in the shelter when he'd asked about Samuel. "I don't know if people like us ever fully heal," he said. "I think we just learn to carry our wounds differently." Martha considered this. It felt true. Truer than anything she'd told herself in weeks. "Samuel would have liked you," she said. "I'd like to think so. He would have argued with you constantly, challenged everything you said, driven you crazy. Sounds like someone else I know." Martha laughed. It was a real laugh, surprising her. She hadn't laughed like that since before the fever took Samuel. "I'm not ready," she said, "for anything more than friendship. Not yet. I'm not asking for more. Not now. But someday I'd like to ask, when you're ready to answer." Martha looked at Hope sleeping peacefully. At the mountains glowing red in the dying light. At Thomas patient and broken and somehow still standing. "Someday," she said, "I might say yes." Spring came slowly to Wyoming. First, the ice began to melt, trickling down from the mountains in thin streams. Then the snow retreated, revealing patches of brown earth and stubborn grass. Then the birds returned, filling the air with songs that had been silent for months. Martha watched it all from the porch of the small cabin she'd been given at the edge of the fort. Hope was 3 months old now, fat and healthy, her dark hair starting to curl like Samuel's had. "You look like your father," Martha told her. "But I think you have my stubbornness." Hope gurgled in response, waving her tiny fists. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was hers. Colonel Harris had offered it as permanent housing after Martha agreed to stay on as the fort's unofficial midwife and healer. Her experience with Hope's birth and her own survival had spread through the post like wildfire. Women had started coming to her for advice, for help, for comfort. She'd found a purpose. Not the one she'd imagined, not the Oregon homestead Samuel had dreamed of. But a purpose nonetheless. Agnes lived in the cabin next door, claiming she was too old to share space with anyone but herself. But Martha often found her visiting in the evenings, holding Hope, and telling stories about her own children, all grown now, and scattered across the country. "You could go to them," Martha said one night. "Now that spring's here, the trails are opening." Agnes shook her head. "They have their own lives, their own families. They don't need an old woman cluttering things up." "You're not old." "I'm old enough." Agnes looked at Hope. "Besides, someone needs to make sure this one grows up right. God knows you can't do it alone." Martha smiled. "Is that your way of saying you want to stay?" "It's my way of saying you're stuck with me, whether you like it or not." "I like it." Agnes harumphed, but Martha caught the glimmer of tears in her eyes. Sarah Jane had been courted by 3 different soldiers over the winter. She'd turned them all down politely but firmly. "I'm not ready to belong to anyone," she told Martha. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." You don't have to belong to anyone. Marriage isn't ownership. Tell that to most men. Martha couldn't argue with that, but she noticed the way Sarah Jane looked at Jake sometimes. The way they talked for hours by the fire about everything and nothing. The way Jake's face lit up whenever she walked into a room. He's patient, Martha said one day. He'll wait. Sarah Jane blushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Emma and Daniel had been unofficially adopted by one of the officers' families. A couple in their 40s with no children of their own who'd fallen in love with the Patterson siblings the moment they met them. Martha had been worried at first. The children had already lost so much. She didn't want them to be hurt again. But she watched them blossom under the Hendersons' care. Watched Emma learn to read her face glowing with pride at every new word. Watched Daniel lose his haunted look, replaced by the mischief of a normal 5-year-old boy. They're going to be all right, she told Thomas. They are. Because of you. Because of all of us. Thomas's ankle had healed, though he'd always walk with a slight limp. He'd been offered a position as a scout for the fort, using his army experience without having to return to military service. He'd accepted. Gives me a reason to stay, he said when he told Martha. You need a reason. I need an excuse. The reason's been standing in front of me for months. They were walking by the River Hope, strapped to Martha's chest in a carrier Sarah Jane had made. The water was running fast with snowmelt sparkling in the afternoon sun. Thomas? I know, you're not ready. I'm not asking for anything. Maybe I am ready. The words came out before Martha could stop them. Maybe I've been ready for a while, and I was just too scared to admit it. Thomas stopped walking. What are you saying? Martha faced him. This man who'd stumbled into her camp half dead and helped her save everyone she loved. This man who'd walked 40 miles on a broken ankle because he'd promised he'd come back. This man who looked at her like she was something precious, something worth waiting for. I'm saying that Samuel will always be part of me, part of Hope. I'll never stop loving him. I wouldn't want you to. But he's gone, and I'm still here, and so are you. She took a breath, and I think maybe that means something. Thomas reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. What do you want it to mean? He asked. I want it to mean we have a chance. At something. I don't know what yet. That's enough for me. Hope chose that moment to wake up, letting out a demanding cry that shattered the moment completely. Martha laughed, pulling her hand free to tend to her daughter. She has terrible timing. She has perfect timing. Thomas smiled. She's reminding us that life goes on, no matter what. Life did go on. Summer arrived hot and bright. The fort bustled with activity as settlers passed through on their way west. Martha delivered 3 babies, lost one mother to childbed fever, and held Agnes's hand when the old woman wept for no reason she could name. I'm just tired, Agnes said. Tired and old and grateful to still be here. You're not that old. I'm old enough to know what matters. Agnes wiped her eyes. And what matters is this, right here, the life we built from nothing. Fall came painting the mountains gold and red. Jake proposed to Sarah Jane by the river, stammering so badly he could barely get the words out. She said yes before he finished the question. About time, Agnes declared when she heard the news. It's only been 9 months, Martha pointed out. 9 months is forever when you're young and stupid. Winter returned, but this time they were ready. The cabins were warm, the supplies were plentiful, and when the storms came, Martha watched them through glass windows instead of frozen canvas. One night, with snow falling softly outside and Hope sleeping in her cradle, Thomas asked Martha to marry him. He didn't stammer like Jake had. He just looked at her across the table where they'd been sharing dinner and said, I want to spend whatever time I have left with you. Will you let me? Martha thought about Samuel, about the promises they'd made to each other, the dreams they'd shared, the life they'd planned. All of it gone now, buried under rocks on a frozen plain. But she also thought about Hope, about Agnes and Sarah Jane and Jake, about the shelter they'd built from broken wagons and sheer will, about the family they'd become not through blood, but through survival. "Yes," she said, "I'll let you." They married in spring when the world was coming back to life. The ceremony was small, just their family and a few friends from the fort. Agnes cried through the whole thing. Sarah Jane caught the bouquet. Emma and Daniel threw rice with more enthusiasm than accuracy. And when Thomas kissed her for the first time as her husband Martha felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Not just hope. Not just survival. Home. Years later, people would tell the story of Martha Ann Brennan. They'd tell it around campfires and in church halls, in newspapers and penny novels. The pregnant widow who'd turned a broken wagon train into a fortress. Who'd held off wolves and blizzards and despair. Who'd given birth in the worst conditions imaginable and lived to tell the tale. The story would grow with each telling, as stories do. The wolves would become a pack of 20. The blizzard would last for months. The shelter would transform into something grand and impossible. But Martha knew the truth. The truth was simpler and harder. The truth was that she'd been terrified every single day, that she'd wanted to give up more times than she could count, that she'd survived not because she was brave or strong or special, but because she'd had people depending on her and she couldn't let them down. The truth was that hope wasn't a feeling. It was a choice. A choice she'd made again and again every morning when she woke up in that frozen shelter every night when the wolves howled outside. The truth was that the people who survived weren't the ones who never fell. They were the ones who kept getting up. Martha stood on the porch of the home she and Thomas had built, watching her daughter play in the yard. Hope was 5 now, fierce and stubborn, and full of questions about everything. She had Samuel's eyes and Martha's jaw, and a spirit that belonged entirely to herself. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The shelter, the winter, everything we went through. That was a long time ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday." Hope ran up to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Papa, look what I found." She held up a small stone, ordinary gray, nothing special about it at all. "It's beautiful," Martha said. "I'm going to keep it forever." Hope ran off again, clutching her treasure. Martha watched her go, this child who'd been born in a hole in the ground during the worst storm in living memory. This child who'd survived against every odd. This child who'd been named for the only thing Martha had left when everything else was gone. "She's going to be something," Thomas said. "She already is." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, Martha could hear the others gathering for dinner. Agnes's voice sharp and affectionate. Sarah Jane's laughter. The excited chatter of Emma and Daniel, nearly grown now, but still part of their patchwork family. Martha leaned back against her husband and let herself breathe. They'd built something here. Not just a home, not just a family, but a life stitched together from broken pieces and stubborn hope. Samuel would have been proud. Hell, she was proud. And as the last light faded and the stars began to appear, Martha Ann Brennan finally allowed herself to believe what she'd been telling others all along. They hadn't just survived that winter, they'd won.